Hey everyone, it's Lisa with Are You My Cousin? It's Thursday. It's time for another Facebook/YouTube live stream where we talk genealogy. So I am excited to join you today to talk about, well, my favorite topic, which is genealogy research, as you well know, and I dare say it is yours as well. As you're coming in, if you don't mind just giving me a thumbs up, let me know maybe where you're watching from. That lets me know that you are seeing me well and that it's coming through just fine on both Facebook and on YouTube. I do it simultaneously as well. Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Excellent. Well, I am excited. It is Thursday and we are getting closer and closer to Roots Tech. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. If you are just finding me, my name is Lisa Listen. I am the creator of Are You My Cousin? And that is a website where you can find, believe it or not, over 300 blog posts at this point on genealogy as well as the YouTube channel. And I'm so excited that you are joining me here today. Hey, Amy, it's good to see you from Oregon. Eric, wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us again. I really appreciate that. I do appreciate those of you. I know a lot of you show up each week, and I really appreciate that. And your support means a lot to me. Hey, Danny, it's good to see you from Ohio. Wonderful. Glad everybody can see me. It looks like we've got YouTube and Facebook doing just great. And so we are going to dive right in. Hey, Rita from Tennessee. Wonderful. A fella Southerner here, and Flo from Oregon. And if you're just meeting me, I am here in North Carolina. So we have had some beautiful, beautiful early spring weather that we get sometimes in February, but it'll turn cold again, I'm sure. Hey, Tammy. Hey, Diane. Good to see you from Ohio. Yay. Wonderful. All right. So I am excited because Roots Tech is getting closer and closer to us. For those of you, if you have not registered yet, go register. It's at rootstech.org. Very easy, very simple. It is, there's an in-person option, which is a low cost. I don't remember the price off the top of my head. It's like around $100 to register, something like that. It is, and it's for the in-person, it's not too late, obviously. For the virtual option, it is free to register. And so, but I encourage you to register because that way you can take advantage of their notifications and stay in touch and know what's happening when it happens. So I would encourage you to do it. Amy said $98. Yes, I was close. Wonderful. Thank you. Oh, that's really sweet. She says she loved the show. Yes, I had actually stopped doing it weekly for a while and was just doing it monthly, but now I've gone back because I've missed it. I'm doing it weekly. So we are back to doing it weekly. So with Roots Tech, it is coming up. I will be having a really cool Roots Tech live experience. So in a couple weeks, I think it's February 23rd, watch your inbox, watch your emails, that some folks from Roots Tech are going to be joining me on a Facebook Live, one of our weekly Facebook Lives, and we've got some really cool stuff planned for that particular Facebook YouTube Live. So you definitely want to watch the social media, definitely watch my emails that come into your inbox for that, because I'm super excited about that, and you do not want to miss that kind of thing. So that's coming up there. Once we hit Roots Tech, I will be doing live streams from Roots Tech directly, and you never know what happens with those. As you know, sometimes it gets a little you never quite know when it's live like that. And so definitely that's coming up. But today, so let's talk genealogy today, guys. I want to get to answering some questions that I commonly get in my inbox. I do try to answer them the best I can if I can do them quickly from my inbox. Sometimes I do keep a running list of common questions so that I can address them, in a larger platform such as this, so that you can, I can hopefully benefit everybody that's there as well. So that's what we're going to do today. And before I get to that, I wanted to talk a little bit more about this idea of back to the basics. So this phrase, back to the basics, has, believe it or not, come up in my work life, my personal life, a lot this week. It seems like every time I turn around, I'm hearing this or seeing this phrase, back to the basics. I was even doing my workout this morning, and she's like, we're going to get back to the basics. And I was like, yeah, I need to get back to the basics for that. And then I'm in my business mentor group that I'm in, and they were like, yep, we need to get back to the basics. And I thought, we really need to get back to the basics with our genealogy research. I know I do. I definitely do. So last night I was working with some clients, and I was doing a kind of a mini presentation to families, and these were all siblings on some of their family research that I had done, and it was a lot of fun. And originally they had shared with me that they had no knowledge of the family history. They had really no memories of the individuals they wanted me to research, and then or any of the family stories. And what struck me was how once they got going, we were live together in a Zoom meeting. Once they started talking with each other, I was amazed at some of the memories that were sparked, that the older siblings actually remember. They remembered some of the stories. And the more we talked, it's like, wait, don't you remember, Aunt so-and-so said this, or Uncle so-and-so did this. It was a really neat thing. And I thought, so my number one thing when it came to getting back to the basics is making sure that we're talking to family members, whether it is siblings, whether it's cousins, whether it's distant cousins, is really pulling in that oral history. It is such a crucial piece of our family history with that. And if possible, doing it in a live format as opposed to straight email, I think allows us to play off of each other a little bit more. Email is great to do that with, but I think when you can actually start talking face to face, it seems to jumpstart or spark some more of those memories. But when it came, as I was showing them their family, I used a lot of the census records for that. And I realized, census records are some of our very basic. That's where a lot of us start, right? We get, we kind of have an idea, we get right into those census records, and we can be very successful for a certain number of generations in those census records. And I want to make sure, I'm going to actually take you over and I want to show you a little bit more about census records and how we can use those, because they're such a basic record. They're a record that we get to, they're readily accessible. And I want to take you into that record. I want to show you a couple things that you might not have thought about when it comes to census records. So I'm going to share my screen. So give me just a second to pull that up real quick. And I think we're going to have, I think you'll be able to see a little bit more of what I am talking about here. Let me grab the right one here. Okay, so now we're looking at the census record. This is actually just a 1900 census record. This is not the family I was working on. But this is the type of thing that I was doing. This is just something I pulled for an example. 1900 census record out of New York, Manhattan. And what we can see here is I've got highlighted, it's really hard to see, but it is, it was Dreyer, I think is how they say it. It was Martin Dreyer, Murtis Dreyer. So obviously we have some issues with that census taker and their handwriting. But so we have this gentleman here, and what we see the house, right? We see the family. We see, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep the pop-ups from happening here. That's okay. We have the father's the head. We have Hannah, his wife. We have the 5 children. So that's that's pretty basic. We see that. We come over, we see their ethnicity, we see their gender, we see month and year for birth dates, all standard stuff that we're used to, right? That we like. But I want to tell a story from here. I want to tell a story about this particular family. And I can tell a lot from them just by looking at this one record without actually even going into other records for this. We do know that the parents are both German born, and they were German immigrants that came over. We know that Murtis came over in 1882. We know that his wife Hannah came over in 1880. So he's been here a little bit. Actually, she came first, but it looks like they've got the years backwards. And we know that Murtis was naturalized. That's a good thing. And he was a day laborer. So he was a worker. What else can I know about this family? So they came over, they got married. They've been married 17 years. Okay, so that gives me a marriage year that I can then go and search for a marriage record. But I'm looking at this column right here. And this is the column where they ask how many children did a wife give birth to, and how many survived. So right away, we can see that this family has suffered quite a bit of loss. Okay, we have Hannah. She has arrived in in America in, was it 1880? So she's been in the country 20 years. She's gotten married. She has given birth to 9 children. She has lost 3 of these children. This family has suffered a tremendous amount of loss in this process of being here in America. So that tells us a little bit about this family story. But we can actually find more about this family story looking at the census record, okay? We can look at the address. So the address for this particular census is East 91st Street. That's actually the Upper East Side in New York. And so I did what every genealogist should do. I went to the map. So I pulled up Google Map and I found the East 91st Street. Let me see if I, oh, it was highlighted. It went somewhere. I think it is right. Where did it go? See, 96, 19. So it's right in here somewhere. So this is the Upper East Side. We're going to have 91st Street somewhere in this general area. So it gives me a visual of where they're at. But then I also noticed when I was here that they are living in an apartment building, or probably what is more likely was a tenement building, which a tenement is basically an apartment. There were some legal definitions around some of what it had to have, but essentially it's an apartment building. So we know we have a building, and these are the families that are in the building. So they are living in an apartment building, basically tenement with other families. So it's probably kind of crowded. These typically were not very large. So this is probably kind of a crowded area for them. But then I like to go over and I like to take a look. I want to see, where else is everybody from? All right. We have Ireland. We have lots of births in New York. We have Germany, Ireland. Where else are people from? Ireland, more Germany, Ireland. So we're in obviously an area of New York. There's a large immigrant population at this time. They tend to be primarily, it looks like, German and Irish, with a lot of German in there, a couple West Indies in there. So we see an area that's there. This is a German family. They're living in an area that has a lot of other German immigrant families there. I want to know more about this area. What can I understand about why are they living at 91st Street? What's that about? So I went to Google and I Googled German immigrant populations on the Upper East Side, New York City. And what I discovered is this really fabulous article. Oh, where'd it go? I had it pulled up. Oh, this was already pulled up. I don't know where it went, guys. It is the of Little Germany in New York City, Klein Deutschland. There was a Little Germany in this area of New York, and this was where a large number of German immigrants settled. This area was known for a lot of bakeries as well. But this gave me an idea of who was there and who else might be there. There's a large Irish population there. I could look at a little bit more. I started to understand what their community was like and where they were living. So what does that do for me as a researcher? So from this census record, this very common record that we use, it allows me to understand more about their life. It allows me to start exploring their community. It allows me to look a little bit more for his naturalization papers. These are pretty basic skills that we've got because we know he came in. I can find arrival papers, hopefully ship passenger list maybe for each of the parents there to see who they came in with, if they came in with anybody. So there's a lot there. We can find the marriage records, and we can potentially even find birth records for the other children who may not have survived. We do not know at what age they may have passed away. But this tells me a lot about the family. All right, I'm coming back to you guys so I can see. All right, let me get back where I can see everybody. Perfect. Okay, so I found this to be very important as part of my research as I was going over with the family, was looking at their family and realizing there's so much of the story that I can tell that I'm oftentimes in such a rush to find that next record that I'm not sitting with the basics that I have and understanding what's there so that I can take advantage of what I already have and what I can already know. Just from that record, I have an idea of what that family's life was like. It gives me an idea of what else could I look for that's happening in that community, because if they're living in an area, Little Deutschland or Klein Deutschland, Little Germany, I might look at what was daily life like for that particular family, or what would it have been like? What might they, what was important to them? What maybe were the common, what were common occupations that might have been the immigrants may have been doing. So these are the kinds of things that I would look for. I would actually, at that point, I might even look for, say, the churches that they may have attended, whether it was a Lutheran church or other type of denomination they might have joined. I might start looking at newspapers, German newspapers for that area, except that I don't read German, so I'd have to have that translated. But that's the type of thing that I would look for. So I think that's right. Danny says he thinks Hannah came in 1884 based on the 16 years. Yes, bad handwriting strikes again. And that particular census record had a lot of that. So anyway, I wanted to show you that because to me, that's such an important thing. And I think that is sometimes when I get questions and when I have my own questions, I realize the answer is probably in getting back and making sure we're very, very clear on the basic records that we already have and what those records are actually telling us. But I wanted to show you that too, to kind of give you, let you have a little insight into my quirky way of thinking maybe on how I look at that record, what story I build so that I can build those next avenues of research. Because at the end of the day, when I'm trying to break a brick wall, and I'm sure you are too, if I can come away from a record with new avenues of research, that's a win. If the record can't give me the answer, but it can give me a clue or it can set me on the right path for another avenue of research, that's, I consider that good. So anyway, I don't know. Do you guys look at that? Let me know in the comments if you guys really delve into the stories of the census records. I find it fun to just go and pick up a blank, a census page of somebody I don't know, like I did with that one, and kind of figure out what kind of story can I create from this? What can I know? What can I learn about that family? What can I learn about that community? It's kind of just a strange little game that I play with myself as a genealogy researcher. But I think it helps me hone my skills when I do that type of information. I do the same thing in cemeteries, by the way. I'll go around the cemeteries and try to figure out what that cemetery, what certain plots will tell me, even though I know nothing about the family. It's just one of those things. But you're genealogy researchers and you get that. So I don't have to worry about that too bad. All right, I'm going to move on into some of the questions that I get. If you have questions, feel free, go ahead and be thinking, and you pop them in the comments. I'm happy to answer them as many as possible that I can. If they are more, if you have questions that are broader, that's going to be easier for me to answer in this particular format. If you have very, very specific questions, that's probably going to be better on the Facebook page or in an email. Or on the website. So just kind of keep that in mind. I'll do the best I can to get to things. All right, let me see what's coming in here. Tammy said she uses marriage, kids, places, and look at the areas. Yeah. Go ahead and broaden out. I didn't always, when I first started with research and census records, I didn't really always pay attention to the address. I might, I would sort of, but definitely not like, are they in a house? Are they in an apartment building? Is it a tenement type thing? I really didn't necessarily look into that as much. So I do a lot more now because it does let me put them better on the map. Jackie says she does the same things because the questions change. Yes, always reading on a census record, any document that we have when it comes back to the basic, always in your head think, read every single column. Okay, make sure you understand what every single column says. It may not be pertinent to your research in that particular moment, but it may have impacts later on. June says, yes, she transcribes it. Absolutely. Transcribing is wonderful because you have to work with it. She seeks out codes, mean, and the sideline notes. Absolutely, June. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. Sometimes in the records, whether it's a census record or whether it's a death certificate or whether it's just a general another type of record, you will see notes that are made in the side or they will have their own codes. Sometimes it's difficult to, you might have to do some research to find out what those codes mean, but there are tables out there. There are ways to find that kind of thing usually. So an example is on death certificates. You'll oftentimes see what's called an ICD code. It's like a number, it'll have a circle around it, kind of over there on the cause of death. So that's very helpful in, learning how to determine a cause of death if the handwriting is really bad. So, okay. Oh, hang on. The comments are coming fast. So hang on. Let me grab them. Let's see here. Hang on one second. Somebody said it's a good way to learn about actual history of the area too, that bills never tell us that. So yeah, it is a good way to think about learning about the area, so that when you don't necessarily, the record doesn't necessarily tell you, but it's a way to understand the area, because it does tell you a little bit more about the person there. We can do that. Amy said that from a very recent German background, as well as settling in German communities, Germans are largely Lutheran, settled in largely Lutheran church communities. Absolutely, Amy. Yeah. But it brings up that part of, if you look at the churches that are in the area and what would have been a common faith for perhaps German immigrants, then you can help direct your research a little bit better and narrow down your choices. Definitely. Oh yeah, it was books, not bills. That's right. Don't worry about typos. I can't type either. And the Dutch, Dutch were in the Dutch Reformed Church as well. All right, there was another one up here, a little bit longer one. Let me just check it out real quick. Rita said her brother-in-law and his wife contacted about a question about a birth certificate. There was a check mark in the box that says twin or triplet. No one has mentioned that he was part of a multiple birth. If he was part of a multiple birth, other babies must have been stillborn or died soon after, right? Would there be records for stillborn babies in 1941? He was born in a hospital in Mississippi, rural county seat. That's a really good question. So yes, sometimes they would, great catch on seeing that birth certificate where they indicate whether it was a multiple birth, like a twin or a triplet. And the answer is not necessarily really clear cut. I think technically there should be a birth certificate, like for a stillborn child. But whether they did or not, they didn't always do it. Sometimes I have seen a reader share with me recently, this is really interesting, actually a birth certificate that had two children on it. It was twins. So that was an interesting thing with it. I would check and see if there was a birth certificate for another child. The child may not have a name. You may just have to do a surname search for that. They may not have given the child a full name. So that might be something that's a little harder to find. I would actually just contact the courthouse and see how that might have been handled. Or you could actually talk to the archives, maybe. I see 1941. I would start probably at the county level and then move on up to the state level if you're having like state archivist, if you're having trouble getting a good, clear answer. But I would start at the county level and see how that might have been done. So yeah, I'm surprised. I'm not clear if you've actually looked for that birth certificate or not, but that would be certainly something to do. And that brings up a good point. I do get a lot of questions about birth dates around that. And a lot of times sometimes birth certificates might have been done a long time after, if the person needed it for some reason, or there are definitely quirks. Just because there was supposed to be a birth certificate issued does not mean there was always one done for whatever reason. I'm not real sure, but yes. Danny said he found his wife's grandfather was an enumerator in the 1910 census, and he visited the house of his future sister-in-law's family. Oh my gosh, she was 14 at the time. So he met his wife that way. Oh, that is a cool conversation piece to know that your ancestor was that. I have a thing in the census record where it was the 1940 and my grandmother is not enumerated. So it's her husband. My father is listed in there. And the woman they list as the wife is actually the next door neighbor. She's actually enumerated twice in her own home and then as my grandfather's wife. So I don't know. She was young woman. She was a single woman. And so I'm like, maybe the census taker was taken with her. I'm not really sure. I just thought it was pretty funny. But that's going to mess up somebody in the future on research if they're not careful. Tammy says she was overlaying maps at one point and it was taking too long, but the old maps help you understand the lay of the land along with the info provided. Absolutely, Tammy. That's a fantastic way to help sort things out. So if you have an older map that you can overlay, there are some sites that you can actually do that with. I know on well, this is actually if you're a North Carolina researcher, one of the map sites allows you to, I think it's out of UNC. I think I'd have to come. It's been ages since I've looked at it, but you can. They have these digitize the old maps, the historical maps, and then you can actually have a feature to overlay them on today's Google map, and you can see it exactly what's there compared to previous times. So that's good. Amy says she finds it confusing when you find changes from census to census as to where people and their parents were born. Always confused you. Amy, I'm glad you brought that up. That is a great question. So when it comes to census takers and the differences that we see year to year, absolutely we will see different. Sometimes you can see people saying they were born in different places on different census records. The first thing to think about is that we're not 100% sure until the later census records, to like I think 1940 census, we're not exactly sure who was giving the information to the census taker. So it's possible you've got different people giving the information and they get it wrong. I have an ancestor. She was born, I have 3 places of birth for her according to the census. One says North Carolina, one says Virginia, and one says DC. Now, my guess is she was probably born in Virginia near DC, but I don't know for sure. But it can get confusing. And so I tend to use those as clues to work with, but I don't necessarily take that for the truth until I've kind of proved it a little bit. There's always the chance that census taker made a mistake. But I think probably the biggest thing would be, we don't know, somebody else is given that information, as well as the fact that there are times during history, during, if there's the wartime or social unrest, to be from certain countries was not always the thing. I know in researching some of my husband's family, that as long as the sons were in their father's household a few generations back, they were born in Russia. But as soon as they were in their own households given information, they were born in America. So we were seeing this. We would see this over time. So don't get too thrown by it. Just make sure you're verifying that ancestor using other records as well. So you've got the right person. So that should be all right. I'm glad you enjoyed this, Amy. Thank you. Jan said some census records have no details of the area. All the details are blank. I know, doesn't that just drive you crazy? Gaston County, North Carolina. I haven't looked at those where they were living. Yeah, sometimes they don't. The census takers were not as accurate. Census takers received instructions, and it got a little bit more detailed and a little bit more detailed with each successive census that was given. But it would be by the 1950s that they were the most, as a group, the most trained census takers that were out there. I mean, they did things, they were doing it on dog sled in Alaska, to get to everybody. They were making sure they got to everybody, and they were well trained to do this. And it wasn't always the case with some of the others, and there's just human error that was involved with it. So it's unfortunate, but yeah, to be able to put them, that's when we have to go into the deed records, sometimes to find it, or city county directories can help us put people on the map too. Deb says she has a census that one person had the real name and then again by her nickname, as well as giving another daughter her older sister's name. Yes, tons and tons of things like that can happen. I'm glad that you brought up the thing about the nickname, because that is one thing. If you have an ancestor that used a nickname or went by a different name, so think about the name Mary. Well, that could be May, or it could be, Mary can have so many different variations. It could be, and I had one, the woman's name was Marie, but it was also Mary, and I would find her under both. So we have to make sure, if we can't find them, that we are looking under both names. One of the ways I get around that sometimes, I happen to know I was struggling to find a young woman. Her name was Nellie, and I was trying all different forms of what Nellie could be a nickname for, and I was struggling to get the right one. And finally, somebody said, well, she had a sister, and her sister, I think what she told me her name was Kitty or something like that. And so when I had the sister's name, I went and found her. And then I was able to backdoor into the right nickname that they were using, or the right name they were using on the census for. So sometimes if you're having trouble with that one, see if you can find that next person in the family. That can help too. Rita said, no digital records listed for the rural county on ancestors. Could this have been a mistake? Possibly, Rita. If Ancestry doesn't have any digital records for a particular county, yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's possible that whatever the process is they do as far as collecting, or whatever kinds of agreements they come to with a county or a state for gathering records, maybe it just didn't have it. Or, yeah, I'm not really sure why. There could be a number of reasons. That could be less about the genealogy and more about just the acquirement of records. I'm not 100% sure to be able to speak to that. Oh, Sarah, your grandma was Nellie, which is a nickname for Nora, which yes. And then I went on to Eleanor, but I don't think it was. So yes, definitely. So Nellie can be a nickname for a lot of different things. And so that was why I think I was struggling so hard to find her in the census record. Amy said a mind cramp. I love that, guys. She's on Facebook. I was finding a family that has an older child, Sarah. Yes, Sarah can have a lot of different names. A younger child further down, also Sarah. The older one dies at a fairly young age. Is it because the family knew the older child was dying? I've not necessarily seen it that way, Amy. It is not uncommon for a family, if they have a child by, say, the name Sarah, and if that child dies young, it is not unusual, or it was not unusual, for the next child of that same gender, so the next girl, to have been given that name Sarah again. And so that was not unusual. I've not seen it where they were doing, where one child was still living, then they gave it, but I suppose that's possible there, but it isn't unusual to have a name reused once a child dies. So I'm not 100% sure on that, Amy. I haven't seen that as a case. If anybody has, feel free to speak to that as well. So yeah. Oh, Sarah, Nellie can be transcribed as Welly. That's true. So yes, Nellie, part of Cornelia. Exactly. So you can kind of see everybody sharing. Those of you who are on YouTube, many people are over on Facebook group are sharing the different variations of nicknames that Nellie could be used for. And that was exactly the problem I was having. It was Nora or Cornelia or Eleanor, or that was the problem that I was having in searching for this particular woman. And so when I went and searched for the sister, once I learned she had a sister, then I was able to find what name they were actually using for her. So that was an important thing about. Another thing that had come up recently in some of my research and questions that had come up were trying to find marriage records. I think a lot of us struggle sometimes to find marriage records. And one in particular, working and trying to find marriage records. And what it made me, there were two things that kind of came up in that when I had to stop and really think, what's happening with couples? Why am I having trouble to find marriage records, and why are people having so much trouble? Well, first of all, I think what's happening is people are not necessarily getting married where we think they're getting married. So a couple, one of the common things is typically they get married in the county where they lived, right? Or if they were from different areas, then one of the counties where they lived. That would be what we would expect. So but sometimes true love doesn't always run a steady course. So maybe they left, maybe they eloped, maybe maybe it was wartime and they needed to get married, more quickly instead of planning something out. And so then they would have gone to what we call it's referred to as like a Gretna Green or a marriage. Like sometimes they're called marriage meals, but this would be like an example of like going to Las Vegas to get married quickly and easily, right? So there are areas where people would do this. So from, say from points in California, they might have gone to Arizona, or they like Yuma, Arizona, or they might have gone to Las Vegas. They might have gone to Mexico, other places, New York. Then they might have gone up to Niagara Falls. That was very common, either from New York up to Niagara Falls, or like from Canada down into Niagara Falls. So there are different places that people would go to get married because maybe it was just easier. Maybe it was less expensive. Maybe the requirements, maybe they were more lenient and they didn't have to have, say, a parental signature for something like that. So there is, if you Google, if you go to the Family Search Wiki site and put in Gretna Greens, then you'll find a list. They have these really nice charts that tell you if your ancestor lived here, then check this city and state for marriage records. It's very, very helpful. So that's a very helpful thing to look at. So you want to be looking for that kind of thing. The other thing that can be happening, and this tripped me up, I learned this the hard way, is look at, particularly if it's a second marriage, but whether it's a first marriage or a second marriage, doesn't really matter. Look at perhaps other family members. It is not uncommon for people to have gotten married in a family member's home. Well, what if their favorite sister lived 2 counties away or over in the next county? Are we really we're missing out if we're not searching those county records for an ancestor's marriage record. I actually found this happened where an ancestor married. I searched and searched, and I did the whole 9 yards, the county records and the Gretna Greens. And then I finally came up with this idea, and I started researching all of the siblings and all of the close family members that she grew up with. And then I figured out where they were living in the time that the marriage would have taken place. And then I started researching those counties for that marriage record. And sure enough, I found her getting married in her sister's home who lived in a different county. So think about what was important to that ancestor, what could have happened. So if you're struggling with marriages, and I know a lot of you do because I know I do, and I know what you guys email me, that would be something I would encourage you to do, would be to start looking at those family members. Where were they living and where would they have gotten married? So that's a big help to when it comes to searching for those marriage records. So good luck with those. Those are really, really tough. Yes, Amy has said, especially when a sibling travels to the parents' home to be wed together. Exactly. So they could have traveled somewhere else, not out of trying to get out of anything, but just to be with a different family, perhaps. All right, I had one more that I was going to give you guys, and this was an interesting one. It came up about the poor ancestor. So I think I'd written recently in this week's email about researching ancestors who didn't have any means, who were poor, who maybe needed help from the county, they needed county funds. So this is an interesting, these individuals can be very, very difficult to research because they didn't have anything, right? If they didn't have an estate, if they didn't own land, if they didn't have any property, you're probably not going to find that estate record because they didn't have anything they needed to disperse, right, after they died. And so that can make it very difficult. But I also, in the article, had talked about the poor house versus the paupers list. And what I wanted to bring up a couple of things. So if an individual was in what's considered the poor house, or whatever terminology that county used, I realize that's not necessarily the nicest term, but that is the term that was used in many of these counties. You can find them on the census record, and they may be listed as inmates. Now, that does not mean they were criminals by any such, or you might find them in an asylum. Those terms, remember, you've got to think about the time period they were being used. It simply means they were residents of, say, the poorhouse. Or I found one of the little girls recently I was researching and she was in an orphanage. It wasn't because she was an orphan. She was not an orphan, but her family was so poor they couldn't feed her. So she went to an orphanage to be cared for. So, but it was considered an asylum, and she was considered an inmate, which the word seemed very, very harsh in today's context. But for that context, it still wasn't great, but that was what they were using. So we definitely want to make sure we are understanding the terminology there that we can use for that. The other question that someone had about poor records was they found an ancestor who died in a poorhouse, and where would that be? Where would they have been buried, or did they have their own cemeteries? And there's not a straightforward answer on that, because it could be yes and it could be no. Some of them may have had their own cemeteries, but others may not have. They may have just gone into what's called the pauper's grave, or potter's field in the city cemetery. So what I would recommend, if you're looking for an ancestor's gravesite, and you know that they were part of living in the poorhouse, or in an institution for individuals receiving that kind of money, those kinds of funds, then I would reach out to the county and ask what would have happened to them. Maybe start at that historical society or even the genealogy society for that, because those are the people who typically know. And if not, I would actually ask at the county offices for people who are in charge of the burials for the county in current day, and ask them. And they may not know, but they should be able to get you into the right process, of the right people who do. So I wanted to share that with you. Let Love Rain says, is there any database online that allows a search by midwife? Many of the ancestors on your mom's side had a family member that delivered many of the children from that part of her line. Oh, that's interesting. I'm not so sure, but there's a couple of things when it comes to midwives. So you could do a search actually in the census records for occupations. So in the search box, it'll usually down on Ancestry, a little further down in the search box, it'll say keyword, or I don't remember if it says occupation or not, but you can, under keyword, you could put midwife, or if it says occupation, put midwife. So you could search that way and it would pull up the midwives for that area. So that might be a way to find out who the midwives were there. As far as an actual database, I don't know of an online database, but for certain time periods, many midwives were actually licensed. And so I would check for licenses for midwives for that particular time period. And that might be a good question to have at your archives, or you might be able to actually just Google it. But I would start, with the archives and check there. But I do know that at certain time periods there were some licensing boards for that, so you might find some information through licensing boards in some of the historical things. So that would be definitely the way I would go on that. Amy said, it's very hard to find an individual buried in a mass pauper's grave. Oh, absolutely. As much as I hate to say it, not everything we search for is findable. It's difficult. All right, guys, I'll wrap it up. I know we're good. But this has been so much fun. Definitely, if you still have questions, guys, feel free. If you're watching this on replay, just pop them in the comments. I do monitor those comments. Feel free to head over to the website. I do talk a lot about the I think the top article there this week is the one on researching ancestors, your poor ancestors, and ancestors who had few means. But there's, as I said, like 300 plus posts. You're welcome to go over and just enjoy reading and learning over there as well. Oh, good. Love Ray said, yes, you hadn't thought about the licensing route. Perfect. Yeah, try that and see if that gets you somewhere. So head over to the website. There's lots of YouTube videos over on the YouTube. Watch your emails, upcoming emails. Mary Everly will be joining me later this month, as well as our Roots Tech folks will be joining me as well. And then, oh my gosh, before we know it, we'll be at Roots Tech, and I'll be talking to you from Salt Lake City. So you guys have a fantastic day and enjoy your research. I want to encourage you to think outside the box a little bit. maybe spend some time playing around in the records, not necessarily looking for your ancestor, but just kind of exploring things to see what you might be able to figure out. I think it's going to give you a new perspective on your own ancestors. It's going to sharpen your skills as well. All right. Okay, guys, you have a fantastic day. I will see you right here next week. And of course, over on the website. Have a great day, guys. Bye.